Chapter 2. Liminal. Like liminal spaces? Liminal? Or a wee bee zoomed in. We didn't make it to Ripley the next day, as I took a slight turn for the worse and was too exhausted to manage it. Morgan, take care of yourself. Quill and Ripley both decided to give it a few more days. Feeling better wasn't the same as being recovered, and I found myself frustrated at how tired I still was. At the waves of dizziness that would hit out of nowhere and send me crawling for a place to lie down. I finished the book from Quill's night table and accomplished little else. Other than learning more about who he was, anyway. At first, he spoke little unless I initiated the conversations, but later I realized he was just trying to give me the space to rest and cope. He was a busy man, and I couldn't fully work out the nature of his job. He was an editor, I'd worked out. Of what I wasn't sure, but I suspected fiction. Quill the writer, eh? Or editor, I guess. But when he wasn't in his makeshift office typing away on the interface, he was taking calls, usually out on the terrace. The ones I heard were a mix of editing related and I wasn't sure what else. I couldn't tell if he had another job or what he was taking such official sounding calls for. Writing was an exclusively evening thing, something he did outside normal work hours. I gathered he was working on a novel of his own. He is a writer! Huzzah! Though I'd worried about him having ulterior motives for helping me, you could only hear someone whisper rant to himself about those damn adverbs so many times before it convinced you he meant no harm. I love it. When I was well enough to move around more, I had offered to help with minor chores like doing dishes. Quill only told me to rest and continued to cook for both of us without asking for help. I couldn't tell if he was a mother hen or still didn't want to trust me with sharp objects. Maybe both? That's why I was currently sitting on one of his bar stools, watching him rinse our glasses and leave them to dry on the countertop. I was trying to work out how to ask him about something that had been on my mind, but wasn't sure how to bring up. My appointment with Ripley was in a while, and he didn't want me to tire myself out. Though I had recovered enough, I didn't think I'd be done in by helping with the dishes. I had recovered, but one thing that bothered me still was the state of my nanosystem. It was still disconnected from the net. I had expected it to recover on its own in a few days, but that hadn't been the case. Though it might be for the best in some ways, it meant I couldn't contact home, which still might be for the best in some ways, but the mental image of my parents sitting at home with no idea where I was or if I was okay was weighing on me. Was there a safe way to contact them? I wasn't sure. But if there was, I suspected it meant asking Quill for yet another favor. I steeled myself and looked up. I was not prepared for hair clip Quill today. It's very practical. It's very practical. It's very simple, very demure. I wasn't prepared. You look wonderful. I love it. I love that for you. Anyway. Quill. He looked up from what he was doing, one eyebrow raised expectantly at my uncertain tone. A slight smile came to my face at the sight of him with his hair like that. Okay, good. I'm glad it's not just me. But it faded. I'm not sure how to ask this, but do you think there's a safe way for me to contact my family in Sysalis? I twisted my fingers together, staring down at the bench top. I'm sure they're in a complete panic over my disappearance. And even if we assume Endgame was involved in everything that happened the day I fled Sysalis, I have no way of knowing if they've communicated anything to my parents. Even if they did, they don't know where I am, which means they can't communicate whether I'm okay either. He paused and turned around, drying off his hands with a dish towel.
We have ways to reach the outside, but safe is the operative word here.
Setting the towel down, he tugged his hair loose and tossed the clip to the sofa. Whoop!
I'm not sure it would be wise for you to contact your family now if you don't wish to be found. It might be possible to do some redirecting of messages through Areli so Nisa itself isn't discovered. We do that all the time. But that's not all that helpful in this situation. If your parents are being monitored, then it's not the geographical location that's the problem, but the message sender. The only way I could think of would be if there was a way to hide that the message was from you, or about you. Then it wouldn't matter where it was from.
He must have seen the disappointment on my face, because his frown deepened as he folded the dish towel and hung it on a nearby holder.
Is there someone who can act as an intermediary? Someone we can send messages through without being detected or rousing suspicion? Someone you can trust, but that isn't likely to be monitored already.
I chewed the inside of my lip as I mulled that over. Could you contact your brother? Would they be monitoring him, maybe?
I have a few contacts on the outside I can route messages through, but there has to be an endpoint. Someone who gets the message to your family.
My father works for the government, so anyone connected to him by work is out. My mother is an artist. Maybe her agent? I don't know him well, so there's no reason for anyone to assume I'd contact him. We'd have to make it seem like a normal business query while ensuring he realized it wasn't. Maybe asking about Mum's personal collection? She has a lot of paintings that she's never put on exhibit that no one else should be aware of.
Is he... Wait. You said your mother is an artist?
Yes? Whoa! Someone who knows things! Hello! Are you a fan, Quill?
Is it possible you're Teresa Leone's daughter?
Oh? You're familiar with Mum's work.
I'm quite fond of her work. I didn't realize you were related. I wanted...
Yes? What would you like? He cleared his throat awkwardly, then turned away and went back to drying an already dry glass. A slight smile came to my lips when I realized he was flustered.
I've been wanting an original of hers for the apartment, but it's difficult to get my hands on something like that from here.
Yeah, I could see how that would be difficult.
This could make it easier than I realized. I've been in contact with her gallery already through a friend in Areli, so another message from me won't seem amiss.
Well, what a coinky-dink. That's fantastic. What a fascinating coincidence, right? This could be helpful. The trick is how to let them know your inside information comes from me. I'll have to think on that a little. I shot him a relieved smile, feeling like some of the weight had been lifted. Thank you so much, Quill. It's really been worrying me. And even if my nanosystem wasn't still scrambled, I wouldn't be willing to contact them through the net. As it is, it's a moot point, since whatever they did to it that day still hasn't worn off. But it's good to have an alternative method anyway.
That day? I'm not sure what you mean, but individual nanosystems are disconnected from the broader global system here. We can't suppress their functions completely, or we would, but we can keep them isolated from the rest of the planet.
Wait, what? Suppressed? The day I was taken, they said that whoever was chasing us disrupted our systems to block communications access. I thought I was experiencing residual effects from that.
I suppose it could be, but I imagine it's just due to being in Nisa. Nothing we do here involves use of the nanosystem.
That was why he had manual lights and a physical clock. Doi. But why?
I'm not sure why you're so surprised, given where you are. Staying disconnected helps us avoid detection, for one. And, as a city of predominantly biosynths, the nanosystem makes us nervous. Unlike you, my brain is partially cybernetic. The idea of someone being able to use the nanosystem to hack into me is unnerving.
But who could...
Any king rank Esper, for one.
I stared at him. That sort of scenario had never even crossed my mind, though I could see how it would be terrifying if it was possible. Yeah, a king that could have a whole army of biosynths. Eee. Someone using the nanosystem to gain access to an individual neo-human's mind? Their thoughts? Maybe even their actions? I didn't realize people viewed the Endgame King that way, but now the animosity toward Endgame was even more understandable. They were seen as a threat on multiple fronts, weren't they? I wished he told me about the nanosystem suppression before. It would have saved me some emotional distress. But he probably hadn't thought about it. I wasn't sure if he'd lived here his entire life, but it was possible he'd never had a fully connected nanosystem. That would make it a sort of non-issue for him. I doubted he'd be used to having to worry about it. Well, I'm glad to know that's the problem. I've been worrying about it not reestablishing its connection after it was scrambled the other day.
I apologize. I should have considered it. I didn't realize it was causing you anxiety.
It's not a big deal. At least I know now. And in all honesty, I suspect it's for the best. If it was connected, it would probably be easy to track me through the system.
Most likely. Another reason we have a protocol that keeps Nisa isolated.
But the nanosystem really isn't used for anything here.
Nothing outside of personal functions. If we could completely deactivate nanites here, we would. At best, we can keep the systems isolated. When not connected to everything else, it suppresses most of the other functions.
I just have never imagined a world where the nanosystem is seen as a threat to personal autonomy.
Unfortunately, it is something a city of biosynths thinks about quite a lot.
I never considered the implications of having mostly cybernetic functions. I'm not an Esper expert, but as far as I'm aware, there aren't Espers capable of controlling... I paused there, fumbling over the words as I almost said normal people, and realized how that would sound. Because humans weren't any more normal than neo-humans. Quill smirked at me as if he realized my struggle.
Everyone else. All the squishy organic types out there.
Yes, the squishy organic types. Though he didn't seem un-squishy to me. Maybe just a little less squishy? I wasn't sure, but now I kind of had the urge to poke him and find out. Maybe next time he's unconscious.
You don't have to try so hard to dance around it. We're all people, human or neo-human. But I understand we're different species with different problems sometimes.
I just don't want to say something offensive. I'm not used to... I shrugged helplessly. We're not even that different from each other, but at the same time, we kind of are.
You won't offend me unless you're doing it on purpose. And for the record, the first time I met a human was odd as well. I kept expecting them to be different, but they weren't.
I'm glad to know it's not just me.
On another subject, are you still up to the appointment today?
Yes, I am. I keep telling you I'm fine now. Almost completely back to normal. I don't think the appointment is going to be a problem.
Good. If I don't take you to see her today, Ripley is going to show up here. Because I get the feeling she's half convinced I've killed you off like a plant or something and don't want to admit it.
I think I'll be fine.
In that case, we should probably...
He gestured to the door. Anytime you're ready.
Give me 10 minutes.
Of course. He headed up to his loft bedroom, but I stayed where I was, drumming my fingers on the bench top as I waited for him to finish changing. It would be good to see more of the city and learn more about where I was beyond the little Quill had told me the last few days. I was looking forward to it, even if it was a medical appointment. At the very least, I was confident there wouldn't be any abrupt kidnapping attempts here. Are you sure about that? Or at least I most definitely hoped that was the case. Ooh, look at us outside. It's very pretty. I like it. The appointment with Ripley was over faster than I expected. Oh, we didn't get to meet her? Boo! Come on now. Less than 2 hours later, and we were walking along a slow-moving river, a surprising feature in a city like this. Quill suggested we walk a little before going back to his place, if I was feeling up to it, which I was. I had been lost in thought for a while before Quill spoke up again. Well, hello. Look at you with your jacket and potentially scarf and necklace. Looking good.
You're awfully quiet.
I just have a lot to figure out now that I have a clean bill of health.
Ripley said you're doing well and most of the residual effects are gone. She didn't say you're back to normal.
I have to consider my next steps at some point.
Sure, but it's not as if I'm going to toss you out on your own just because Ripley confirmed you aren't dying. You have plenty of time to think about it.
I gave him a grateful look as we walked. Not that I'd expected him to throw me out right away. Not Quill. But the reassurance was welcome. Thank you, Quill. I don't know how I'll be able to pay you back for all your help.
I didn't help you because I wanted you to pay me back.
I know that too. It's probably a bad look for the city if people just die in alleys all the time. He gave me a scathing look, despite the slight smile forcing its way to his lips.
Perhaps if you'd at least had the decency to climb in a dumpster.
I'll try to remember that next time.
Do I need to get your assurance there won't be a next time, Morgan?
No. Nearly dying in an alley one time was more than enough.
What a relief. I've heard some humans have unusual hobbies, so I was somewhat concerned.
My smile dimmed as we continued on in silence for a few more minutes. Even if Quill wasn't going to toss me out on my own, I still had a lot to think about now that it was clear I was almost back to normal. The bruises were fading, the scrapes healing, the headaches had all but vanished, and I was left with a newfound awareness of the presence of my own psi energy. A single question had been plaguing the back of my thoughts when I would let it. Now what? Go back to New Albion and turn myself into Endgame? Or try to stay and start over in Nisa? A clean slate and a new beginning, for as long as I could hide here. How did you start over like that? Was it even possible to pick up the pieces when it seemed like there were no pieces even left to gather? Or did you just start over and rebuild from scratch? The prospect was daunting. There was an unshakable sense that going back was the right thing to do, and persistent guilt that I was considering doing otherwise. I kept arguing with myself about it. Did I want to adhere to an arbitrary right because someone decided Espers are too inconvenient for polite society? I didn't. But somehow I couldn't stop the quiet grieving for everything I'd left behind, that profound sadness in the pit of my stomach, the deep want for things to go back to how they were, though they never could. More than the struggle of starting over, it was those feelings that would make moving on difficult, I thought. The fact Nisa was an unfamiliar path to navigate didn't help, though. I knew little about this place beyond the few bits Quill had shared here and there.
If you talk about whatever it is that has the gears turning so hard in your head, maybe it will help you work through it.
There is a lot to talk through. He gestured to himself with that usual, slightly irritated confusion on his face, and once again, I was struck by how this man didn't seem to grasp the concept of being bothered. Rather than being annoyed I was relying on him, he seemed more baffled by my hesitance to do so. I know in my head that my options here are limited. I go back and join Endgame, or I stay and start over here. My heart is saying that I can't decide without even knowing the basic details about here. My heart is also saying that basic details don't change the options.
Your heart sounds like a confusing place.
At the moment, it is a very confusing place.
Many people here have abandoned previous identities and lives. Nisa embraces that at even its highest levels. It's a trait that's even spread to Aurelie in some capacity. Because we aren't your average people, or your average city. One thing that will be necessary is for you to not compare this to any place you've ever lived. Granted, I've only lived here in Erebos, and they're similar in some regards. But I have friends from the outside, even from New Albion, so I guess that's something I can say with certainty. We have freedoms other places don't, since we're not tied down by some of the more ridiculous attempts to control people. And in many ways, we live with greater limitations. There's a lot of give and take in that regard. And some days, Nisa feels like a very fragile bubble. Others, it feels like a safe harbor. But in other respects, you might be surprised at how normal it is. We have businesses, we do commerce, we have a unique economy with business ties to Areli. We have internal politics, crime, unfortunately, like you'd find anywhere.
If I found a crime-free utopia, I might forget everything else and move there right away, regardless of anything else. Then again, I was now a rogue Esper, not just unregistered. I would be ruining that crime-free aspect by my very presence.
Nisa is a small city by some accounts, but it's still a city, and despite how precarious our existence may seem sometimes, we have strong roots, and a lot of determination.
He directed me to a covered bench nearby, placing his hand gently at the small of my back.
Let's sit for a while.
With the overhead canopy shading us, I drew my legs up and watched Quill as he swiveled toward me, resting his arm on the back of the bench.
Nisa crash course. Not that I think this will help you make up your mind. The population is around 65,000 people, probably much smaller than you're used to.
That's tiny. More like a single sector of Sosalis.
It was founded almost 175 years ago.
That long? Somehow I expected it to be newer. How did a place like this hide for over a century?
At first, it was just a few dozen people squatting in an unoccupied dome. They cleaned up a couple of buildings and started living here. You might be surprised to learn that's not that uncommon. It's not just neo-humans and espers either. Plenty of people get displaced from more populated domes and end up in some abandoned dome.
I was somewhat aware of that. Or I've seen the topic come up sometimes in the news, because a lot of unoccupied domes still have some power and basic environmental controls. The Triad government is always complaining about the lack of system control required to turn it off now that the AI is dormant.
Why am I not surprised to hear the Triad whines about it?
They do find a lot to complain about.
Here in Nisa, the occupants started to rehabilitate the dome, and stragglers would show up, growing the community. Word tends to propagate about places like this one.
When did the Aurelian government become aware of it? Or did they always know?
Well, we don't know for sure. The community had been here for 3 decades before they decided to do anything. At the time, it was almost entirely biosynths. They petitioned to stay, and Areli has always been lax in its approach to, shall we say, outsiders. You might be shocked to learn that there's at least one rather high-profile public official in Areli that's neo-human. It's kind of an open secret in some circles.
What shocks me is that the Triad allows it. Or I guess they probably don't know. I imagine they'd launch an inquiry faster if they did.
Everyone would deny it anyway, and it's not like they could target a single individual and force medical exams. They've tried their best to establish a tyranny on this side, but haven't quite managed it yet.
Tyranny. It was strange to hear someone say it that way. Though I guess there were plenty of people who saw the Triad in that light. But when you were on the inside, it didn't always feel that way.
Though I think it's naive to believe the Triad doesn't have a few shadow communities of its own in some of the smaller domes, supposedly being used for something else. Not sure they're quite like this one, though. At least not for New Albion. Maybe Cerna.
Cerna's always been the more laid-back member of the Triad, so that wouldn't surprise me. How many people like me show up here in Nisa?
That depends what you mean by like you. If it was easy to find out about us or find us, we might not have persisted long enough to become what we are.
You're the one that said rumors about places like this propagate.
Within certain communities, yes. Word of mouth, rumors. That doesn't mean it's easy to figure out where we are. Though some say that's changing. Regardless, there are only a few of accidental arrivals like yourself who pop up every so often.
And intentional arrivals?
More. Out in Erebos, Nisa is a pretty well-known place. And in the abandoned cities. In Areli, you are more likely to catch wind of it too.
The abandoned cities?
People traveling from Erebos often go through there on their way to and from Nisa. Anyway, most new arrivals come from one of those 3 places. Honestly, the population growth in the last 2 decades has been astronomical.
Emotional or analytical? I think we're emotional, right? Yes, we are emotional. So he did say he's lived here in Erebos, so I guess that makes sense. Does that mean you came here from Erebos? You said you lived there at one time, but he could have been born in Nisa and moved to Erebos and back, I suppose.
I was born there. I came here about 20 years ago when Nisa was less than half the size it is now.
Wow, it grew that much in 20 years? Respect. I always heard it was impossible to leave Erebos. That's what they tell us, that the Eris Sea is not traversable, so after the tunnels were sealed up... He let out a scoffing laugh, rolling his eyes.
I'm sure when they sent neo-humans there, they hoped it would deter us from getting out. But either they were stupid, or we're more resourceful than they gave us credit for. People have been coming and going from Erebos for generations, and despite their most valiant efforts, it isn't as if they ever managed to get every neo-human there anyway. They just told themselves that to feel more secure.
To feel more secure. We were so good at shutting people away to feel better, weren't we? Whether neo-humans or Espers, whether a dome in the scorching emptiness of the Trinity Desert or Endgame. I looked down at the ground, eyes tracing the hexagonal pattern of the paved footpath. Erebos. A place for a forgotten people, or at least a people everyone had wanted to forget. The way he's like glaring at her now, like she's in her head again. Talk to me! Why will you not talk to me? All the things that had only existed on the fringes of my life, things I'd never had to confront. They were piling up in front of me, making me realize how small my world had been until now. This was not just a city of refugees. It was a city where everyone was trying to be... more. In that realization, there was epiphany and a fleeting sense of belonging rested over me for an instant, before it vanished and the loss crept back to take its place.
Does it bother you to think I escaped from exile?
Oh yes, I'm terrified, you horrific criminal. That's the one! Oh yes, I'm terrified by the sheer lawlessness of your dramatic escape from the desert. Absolutely terrified, you criminal. An easy smirk slipped over his face at my teasing. He rested his head against his hand as he grinned at me.
I admit I was horrified to find a rogue Esper lurking in a dark alley as well. We try to keep crime off the streets in this city, you know.
Yes, you were so horrified you promptly yelled at me for it.
I did not yell.
Sorry, you expressed your displeasure at my lying in the street, bleeding, in a very soft and gentle tone that wasn't at all annoyed.
And then took you home like a lost puppy, and I've regretted it ever since you yelled at me for sleeping in my own bed.
Because I was in it with you!
Are we going to rehash this once again?
You brought it up.
That's because I'm still annoyed you woke me up for that.
What a petty grudge.
All grudges are petty.
At least you can admit it. Oh, look at these two in their banter, it's so cute. One thing was true, no matter what sort of path had brought me to Nisa. There was certainly worse people I could have found myself with than this guy. Yeah, girl. I gave him a sidelong look, tipping my head to the side as I regarded him for a moment. The journey that led me here was so... awful. I have to imagine a lot of others had difficult journeys too. Including you.
I guess parts of it were, if you're talking about the physical journey. Traversing the desert isn't easy, and Erebos is one of the domes furthest out in the sand. The heat's so intense out there that most of the tunnels out to the dome run beneath the surface. They sealed them up long ago and half are caved in by now, so we had to go over the sand. It was pretty miserable until we got closer to the Nomos cities.
Have we read this one yet? Oh, the abandoned cities, yes. Yes. Isn't it longer to go all the way to the Twilight region than backtrack?
You have to go the long way to avoid Triad drone patrols, and we can't get anywhere near the solar array if we don't want to be caught. It's a pretty roundabout trip. Doubtless not as difficult as what you're imagining, though.
A smug grin eased onto his face as he leaned back a little.
Well, it might be hard for a city girl like you, I guess.
I knew it was an attempt at a dig, but I shrugged and smiled at him. I can't imagine growing up in Cisalis would have prepared me for wandering around the desert. Or the wastes. But my goal was... My throat tightened unexpectedly, causing me to falter. I swallowed hard and tried to continue with a steady voice. I always wanted to go to Dione to study the ruins there, so I've tried to spend time preparing for that. There are a lot of inhospitable areas there as well. Quill must have realized my train of thought because he was silent for a long time after I said it. I was the one who tried to change the subject to something easier to talk about. How much of the population here is made of Espers, then?
Oh, that. Well, they're not uncommon in general. I suppose it would be considered proportionally sizable, given how small the city is. But they're still a minority overall. Around 10% of the human population.
Based on the numbers he'd given me before, that would come out to a couple thousand people. Definitely a lot for a population this size. I stared up at the sky through the gap in the overhead canopies for a while, thinking about that. And finally, I looked at Quill again. I know Areli is more lax with its regulations, but it's still so hard to believe they allow this place to exist.
We've managed to find a good symbiosis with them. We have municipal autonomy similar to other domes. We're just not officially recognized, and there aren't any records of us anywhere in their system.
But why? It seems like such a liability.
Why not? Areli is non-aligned and independent. They've always done the bare minimum to maintain economic relations with the Triad. Nothing more. Neo-humans were rehabilitating an unused dome and doing a damn good job of it. Areli had no reason to stop them. Most of the direct ties Areli has are with Cerna anyway, and they're also a little more lax with regulations.
If it's not officially recognized, I suppose Nisa is pretty self-contained in terms of commerce and traffic?
Yes. And no. Unofficially, we have dealings with Areli. Officially, it's just the wastes in several Nomos cities. Trade, commerce, and so on. And even then, it's unofficial in the sense that Nisa itself is unofficial.
How fascinating. In New Albion, all I ever heard was about how the Nomos isolate themselves in the wastes and never deal with outsiders.
Yeah, well, the Triad seems to have a very specific view of the rest of the world.
Still, for Areli to allow all this just for the sake of rehabilitation. Is the entire dome habitable now? The city clearly doesn't take up all the available space.
No, progress has slowed as the city started to require more attention and organization. The outskirts aren't really habitable, but we're still working on expanding and repairing.
It's interesting dome rehabilitation was important to Areli when they can't even utilize the dome normally.
Oh, it wasn't just that, of course. At least not later on. Come on. I'm hungry, and my favorite cafe is nearby. We can continue our history lesson as we walk.
I accepted his hand and pulled myself to my feet. I was studying history and culture, so I apologize if I'm interested for more than just the obvious personal reasons. Even if the last few years my focus was on xenological anthropology, we still studied it through the lens of human history and society, since we don't have another frame of reference.
Oh, you don't have to apologize. I'm just wondering if you find a kind stranger to recite the founding history of every place you visit.
I've never visited a place quite like Nisa before. A lot of other domes have a very similar history of establishment. But Nisa is unique, so of course I'm curious.
I'm just wondering if I should give you a quiz after.
I'd pass, of course. I'm an excellent student.
I guess we'll see.
Does Areli maintain relations with Nisa because all of its population are so charming? Or did I just get lucky to be dragged out of that alley by you?
Oh, you were extremely lucky. Trust me.
So, if it's not the charming population, what is it?
It's the Research Institute. And Stratum.
These have gotta be new things, for sure. Yep. The city-owned and run research center that makes up the core of Small City. Core of Small City, okay. The NRI runs dozens of projects regarding Arraean technology, syndicate history, Imidrium and Aerosol, as well as the nature of Arcalis. There are also projects on Thalassan culture and technology, cybernetics, medical studies, and numerous other specialties. Sounds like a cool place for Morgan to go visit. Some of their studies go beyond the restrictions imposed on the rest of the planet's scientific communities. For instance, they have had teams doing in-depth studies of the labyrinth and underground for decades. Go on. Because many of the teams working with Arraean technology and ruins are entirely made of neo-humans, they are able to handle the tech with more ease and safety than anyone else on the planet. Their research is the foundation of their strong relationship with Areli, and the original reason Areli was willing to allow Nisa's existence. Okay. Stratum is the largest corporation in Nisa. Nisa has a very small economy where most of the businesses within the city are relatively small. Stratum's sheer size makes it a unique fixture in the city. Its focus is spread across multiple industries, but the greater part of its focus is in technology, though even within that area, it covers several industries, including energy and medical. It also houses a large research center that often partners with the NRI. It receives funding from investors in both Nisa and Areli, operating a shell corporation in the latter to cover its true location. Much of its research focuses in Arraean technology, including decoding relics, and utilizing array radiation as an alternate clean energy source. Very interesting things. Stratum?
The biggest corporation in the city. It runs one of the largest research centers here. But we also have the city-run institute. Stratum gets a lot of funding from Areli.
From the circles of people who are aware of the city.
Correct.
What kind of research is being done here?
All sorts. Maybe some things you won't find being researched elsewhere. As you can imagine, we're not bound by some of the restrictions as other places. Not that we research anything that violates Areli's treaties, but there is much less red tape to deal with given our status. Even so, no one is studying anything necessarily illegal.
Necessarily illegal?
Don't read too much into that.
I'm currently reading a lot into that. You can't say that, then tell me not to read into it. What in the world is being researched here?
Arraean technology for the most part, and things related to it.
You mean like relics?
Oh, relics are just the tip of the iceberg, Morgan.
What does that mean?
What I said. Relics are only part of the focus. There are the ruins, the labyrinth beneath the city, the construct, cultural studies, linguistic studies.
Cultural and linguistic studies. And ruins. There are Arraean ruins here?
Yes.
In that moment, literally everything else we had been discussing flew straight from my head. Prepare yourself, Quill. She's gonna go into nerd mode any time now.
And a vast labyrinth constructed of Imidrium with alien circuitry running all through it.
A vast labyrinth. Of Arraean origins? Have you seen it? What's it like? Is it open to the public? No, I mean, of course it's not, but is there public information on it? Can I see it? What sort of ruins? Have they made any progress deciphering Arraean symbols? What's the construct? Is there an archive of... Quill covered my mouth with his fingertips, forcing me to stop. Shh. He literally said shh. I love this man. He's perfect. Oh, he's great.
Shh. Am I supposed to remember the 50 questions you just rapid-fired at me and answer them one after the other, or...
I pried his hands off my mouth, glaring. He let out a little cough, looking away from me, still laughing. Oh, come on! I didn't specialize in Arrayan culture, but this is what I wanted to spend my life doing, Quill. Of course I'm interested in it.
Well, to answer one question right away, no, you cannot see the ruins. No exceptions. Espers aren't allowed below level 3 in any of the research areas.
Level 3?
The ruins are underground, right? Levels 1 and 2 are for city functions, sewage and the like. Level 3 is the start of the labyrinth, but has no circuitry in it. In fact, some parts of those catacombs extend up to the first 2 levels in places. Levels 4 and below are Arrayan.
Underground Arrayan ruins. I'd heard there were things like that on the night side, but had no idea they existed on this side as well. That was amazing. But there are no Espers in the research groups?
You don't have to look that devastated. Of course there are Espers in the research groups, just not anywhere near Arrayan technology. Maybe you're not aware that it can react violently to Psi. It's for everyone's safety. The whole reason we can research it here when no one else can is because
Neo-humans don't possess Psi. I didn't know Arrayan technology specifically reacted to Psi, but if that was true, nearly every human on the planet produced some amount of Psi waves, except maybe some Nomos and a few other exceptions. So this was the only place in Arcalis where they could study Arrayan tech like that. I guess most of what they've learned so far hasn't been released to the public, since Aurelie wouldn't be able to identify the source of the studies. What I would give to see some of those reports.
Oh? What would you give?
Not that I have any worldly possessions to offer right now, but if I did... You said they're looking into the culture and language, not just the functionality of their technology.
As much as possible. That's mostly in the Nician Research Institute. Stratum's focus is the tech. Array radiation, relics, imidrium, and its properties. We can't process the alloy, but we've been trying to figure out what it's made of and why it reacts to Psi in such an unpredictable manner. A few decades ago, they isolated the specific component that reacts to Psi waves.
Arcalium. First isolated by the Nician Research Institute, Arcalium is a component of the imidrium alloy that Arrayan relics are made from. The only known source of raw Arcalium was also discovered in the ruins beneath the city, which helped them identify the component in the alloy. Though imidrium is known to react to Psi, for many years it was unsure if the reaction was caused by the material or energy running through it. The discovery of Arcalium partially answered this question, as it is known that it reacts to Psi on its own, though the mechanism is unclear. Processing Arcalium produces a substance known as aerosol, which can have a direct impact on the phoric system of humans and augments. It has no observable effect on neo-humans. We're learning lots of interesting things.
They identified a source of the raw ore as well, and have experimented with processing it. They called it Arcalium because scientists are terrible at naming things.
Admittedly true sometimes. Are you involved with the research centers? You seem to know a lot about it. He gave me a curious look, but only shrugged.
Not exactly, but I have some administrative responsibilities here in Nisa. It affords me access to information about what people are working on.
Administrative responsibilities? That made sense with some of the snippets I'd heard of his calls, but I wondered what it meant.
You said you wanted to spend your life doing this. What precisely does that mean?
I was studying interplanetary archaeology in Cisalis, though I specialized in Senecan culture. But Arrayans had such an impact on this world, I can't help but wonder who they were and what their motivations were. I'm not altogether uninterested in their culture. It's just always been more fraught with difficulty given the restrictions on studying any known ruins, and the troubles with relics.
It's not without its dangers, but much of that is mitigated by the lack of psionic ability of our researchers.
That left me with so much to contemplate. It was a tantalizing promise of not just a normal life, but a dream I thought was out of reach. I hadn't expected this connecting point. A research hub. I never would have imagined it. where are we? This is a lovely place. As Quill said, we stopped at a little cafe for lunch, a place he must visit often since the waiter knew him by name, and Quill introduced me to him as well, a young man named York. It amazed me how he seemed to have met everyone. I wasn't sure if he just spent a lot of time visiting random places or what it was. York wasn't even the only person he introduced me to. Everyone was welcoming, and no one asked anything after Quill said, "She's new here." They all nodded as if they understood precisely what it meant. It had the feeling of a very close-knit community. Though smaller and less frantic a city than I was used to, Nisa was beautiful and thriving, and the people were fascinating and diverse. There were a lot of visible cybernetics, which wasn't something I was used to. Not that I'd never seen them, but in many places people covered them with synthetic skin so they weren't noticeable. Here, many were flashy and, well, fashionable, with intricate lights or decorative elements. It was interesting to see. It was such a strange place. A fragile bubble, as Quill called it. I got that sense from my brief outing as well. Quill and I hailed a taxi when we left the cafe, though I assured him I was fine. He wasn't having it. I feel like we're gonna have more scenes at that cafe. No way it just showed up for that one scene. I only realized how tired I was when we were back at his place and he insisted I rest. It was when I sank onto the sofa that I realized my legs were aching and I was far more tired than I realized. The bruises and scrapes had faded, but Quill was right. I wasn't completely recovered yet. For a while I laid on my side staring out the large windows, then rolled onto my back staring at the ceiling, then back on my side. Nisa was a fascinating place with a vibrant culture and unusual history, a unique center of scientific research that represented a side of Arcalis I never knew existed. And yet, if I stayed... Was it arrogant to assume a queen-rank Esper being discovered here might cause lasting harm to what was the precious refuge for so many? I could live here, I thought. Though I'd only seen it at the surface level. I could build something here. Maybe. I had that feeling. But now that I had determined that, I wasn't sure where to start. I let out a groan and rolled over again. Maybe I should just get up and talk to Quill some more. I lifted myself to my elbows, but paused as he started speaking from where he was sitting in his little work area. But not to me. A call? He was speaking in a hushed voice, but, well, it was a studio. Even if I tried not to listen in, I'd have heard everything unless he stepped out onto the terrace.
I was hoping to hear an update from you soon. No, we still haven't found the source. The lead fell through. Believe me, we aren't happy about it either. I thought the same. Of course I understand the severity of the situation and the risk to Nisa. That is why I'm being particularly cautious, Detective.
Detective? Yeah. Detective? My heart leapt to my throat as I considered for an instant that he was talking about me. He wasn't talking about me, right? But the anxiety faded almost instantly, leaving me with an uncomfortable pounding in my ears from the unexpected surge of panic. He wouldn't be talking about me with me laying right here. And besides, it didn't even make sense with the rest of what he was saying. As I flopped on my back and threw an arm over my eyes, I wondered if I would ever stop panicking at the idea of being turned in or found.
You don't have to tell me that, as I'm sure you can realize. It's my duty to protect the citizens of this dome. I know. I'm glad to have someone on the outside as well.
I swear, if Ruben shows up, I'm gonna flip.
Of course. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
I shifted back to my side as Quill stopped talking. Whatever that was about, I assumed it must be work. Seemed serious, though. Finally, I shut my eyes and managed to doze off. In my half-sleeping state, I was aware of a rustle nearby and something warm being draped over me. A gentle hand moving my hair off my face. Then footsteps moving away. Well, the night is very pretty. I slept until Quill woke me up for dinner, then went to bed early, having relocated my sleeping spot to the sofa because Quill might not find it awkward to be unconscious next to each other. But I did, and his sofa was comfortable anyway. I would just die laughing if he saw her there, picked her up, carried her to bed. Like, there you go. That'd be great. I dreamt of walking over hot sand, of wind-swept dunes, and a sun caught forever just above the horizon, casting long shadows over ancient ruins waiting to be explored. Interesting that you're dreaming of that place.